So welcome everyone to this debate. It's called The AI Paradigm, Changing Translation and Shaping the Future. Can you still hear me? We hope to bring you quite a broad and high-level discussion about how AI is changing translation. We're going to explore some of the ethical implications of automating this very human process of producing and transforming language. What we want to think about is what do we gain and what do we lose in an AI-based world? And echoing Katja's point yesterday, what approaches and actions do we want to take and what do we want to prioritise living in this new paradigm? So I'm very happy to welcome our two panellists, Gry Hasselbach. I think she's going to join us in a moment. But we have with us Jaap van der Meer, who has extensive experience in the language industry and has seen many transformations over the decades and can bring many insights on that. He is the CEO of an AI data solution called Taos. And I think we should have Gry joining us as well. So Gry Hasselbach is an author and scholar. She has expertise in the fields of data, AI ethics and governance. So please welcome our two panellists.
Thank you.
So we're bringing together, Gry.
Sound is not working.
I think, Gry, you have control over the mic, so you can turn yourself on mute and off. Maybe we should test if we can hear you.
Okay, but you see me?
We can see you and we can hear you.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
I would like to ask you both to introduce yourselves a little bit more, if you can, because you're bringing together two very different perspectives here. So perhaps we can start with you. Jaap, can you give us some background about your experience in the language industry and what do you do with data AI at Taos?
Sure, yeah. So, I accidentally came into the translation world. Give you some context and background. I studied many years ago, obviously, Dutch linguistics and literature at the University of Amsterdam. And then I needed some more money, so I found a job through Randstad at IBM. Initially to proofread all their printed stuff, and then there was things, there were things that needed to be translated. The first computer manuals, basically, and it was a good way for me to earn some money on the side of my studies, but it became bigger than that. I started a company, and I forgot about all my aspirations to become kind of a researcher in literature and 19th century romantics and what have you. I still regret that, but it's a fact of life that you have to live with. But then I moved to the lab in Austin, Texas, to help IBM create the first spell checker for Dutch language, which kind of opened a new world for me, like, hey, can computers really do that? I wasn't familiar with the concept of a computer before. And that's how I kind of step by step got drawn into this world of translation automation. I created sort of some noise here and there talking about all these beautiful things that computers could do for language over the years. But it's basically based on my experience, that translating these manuals, I personally didn't feel that to be very intellectually challenging or rewarding. I immediately thought, well, spell checking, maybe they can also do more, translate. So that this has been sort of very much my focus. Full context here, my wife is a literary translator, so we have these two worlds at the kitchen table always, and we get there later, but I think there's really a very clear red line between what you use the computer for and what you don't use it for. I mean, not for literature or for scientific books, but for everything that's kind of utility. It's mandatory, it's instructional, it's helpful, as opposed to, let's say, sentiment, where you want to get across, and it's very much in line with the previous speaker, Ashkan there, anything that has to do with emotions, metaphors, what have you. Don't even think about using the computer to do that part of the work, but So, and back, to the question about TAUS, I started after leading several, first my own translation company, then joining other companies and became the CEO of other companies. And so I've been very active in the translation world for many years. In 2005, the technology was that far that I started TAUS, Translation Automation User Society, first as a think tank, bringing all people together who were interested in this whole idea of automation. But very soon, people said, oh, can I have your data? Will you share your data? Because the data will help us to improve the performance of the engine. So then we started the data repository, the TAUS data repository, and this has been the motor in our company to help the big tech companies produce better machine translation. And now we do things that even are more sort of maybe of a curse here in this world. You can use the computer and these models also to check the quality of the translation. So now we have quality estimation as a fully automated function as well. So that's what TAUS is doing. Yeah.
Very interesting, thank you, yeah. And Gry, can you give us a brief introduction about your role and your background in AI data and ethics?
Yeah, sure. And thank you. This was a really interesting story to hear how you went through this entire going forward. That's what I love about this field, is that you see how this humanistic field suddenly just gets a different spin to it. And basically, when we had a briefing meeting, we actually realized what most people don't know about me is that I actually also come from a humanistic language background. My original degree was actually in Nordic philology and literature. And that's kind of an interesting fact that I don't usually share. But more like more relevant to this conversation, then of course what my background is has been for many basically like 2 decades in terms of being very involved in the EU work, in the entire movement around data and data ethics in mostly in Europe, but also globally. I was part of the high-level group on AI that was established in 2018 by the European Commission that developed the EU's ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI, and that is now being basically translated, if we can say that, into the AI Act that some of you might have heard of and learned about. I have also now then continued this work, working more with the diplomacy part of creating a foundation globally for this EU approach to AI, a more trustworthy approach to AI, and the AI Act in the what's called the International Outreach for a Human-Centric Approach to AI initiative, which is a project that is funded by the Foreign Policy Instrument, the EU Foreign Policy Instrument, and is supporting the European Commission in maybe collaborating with like-minded partners globally on creating this, you could say, this different stance on how to treat data, how to approach, for example, artificial intelligence technologies when it's deployed and when it's used. And then basically on a more kind of academic level, what I work with is mostly data ethics, but with a view on power, and that we can maybe talk about more in the further conversation, maybe based on some of the work that I've done in some of the books and work I've published.
Fantastic, thank you, Gry. And we have a Slido for the audience. If we can bring our first question up on the screen, and it relates to what Jaap mentioned just now about using machine translation for utility purposes versus for literary translation. So the question is, what is your personal red line in terms of the type of content that should never be translated using AI? So just while we wait for that to come up. The key word is personal, so it's an imaginative exercise. You can draw that line wherever you like, according to your understanding of translation and individual values. We'll just give it a bit of time. So poetry is really sticking out, I think, here, and medical, interestingly, as well. Jaap, what do you think of these answers? Is this what you would have expected? Confidential.
Yeah, poetry,
documents?
of course. I mean, that's the core there. I find it interesting that medical shows up with bigger font there because, I think people think, that's life saving and threatening or whatever, but it depends more on the content type, I guess. I would draw the line, as I said, between utility and sentiment. I mean, timeliness. How quickly do you need the information? These are the sort of the key attributes to deciding factors on whether to use machine translation or not. But there's certainly a lot of medical text that could very well be translated by machines as well. Yeah. Yeah.
There was an answer up there, Agree, that I think you would be particularly interested in, which was text with consequences.
Okay.
Well, utility, I mean, you give people instructions to do something or warnings to not do something. And so that's all text with consequences. And sometimes it needs to go out fast. And all of that will be machine translated, if not already. Communication, just getting one message across to a driver going to a particular address, people speak different languages. Uber is machine translating everything, all the customer agent communication. So that's text with a consequence, right? Giving somebody an instruction, and it works perfectly well. Yeah.
So let's maybe think about where we are right now. In any radical technological transformation, there are always some who benefit and some who lose out. And it can take some time for a clear picture to emerge. The benefits might take time to arrive, and other impacts and side effects might be subtle and incremental, but ultimately transformative. So Jaap, what do you see as the key benefits of AI and machine translation in particular? And who do you think the main beneficiaries are of this technological change?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, I think. But at this very start of 2005, I had a bit of an inspirator, a mentor. He was working on some microsystems. It's just somebody you meet, right, on the road, and you talk. And he raised this sort of term, translation out of the wall, early on. It was earlier, even 2003, 2002 or so. And I thought, translation out of the wall. So like electricity, internet, a utility, ubiquitously available to everybody on the planet, that's fantastic. If that's possible, if you can machine translate everything, the moment it's being said or written down in all the languages of all the citizens on this planet, that's a fantastic view. Let's go for it. So we made it our sort of almost our slogan, at Taos when we started the think tank. Translation out of the wall. Ubiquitously available to every citizen on the planet, every citizen, consumer, patient, what have you, taxpayer. That's the goal. Because it helps, I think, in the spirit of the previous speaker, our civilization to evolve faster. It helps to education. It helps technology to move faster. Perhaps, if we're dreaming, it helps to create a more peaceful world. Well, that's definitely not the case today, unfortunately. So that part of the vision didn't come through, didn't become true. But for all the rest, we saw only benefits. I must say, today, it's more challenging. And because it's happening, right? It's basically there. This vision is now reality. Who's now benefiting most? Well, big tech, obviously, yeah. And I think this is largely part, of course, to the capitalist system that we live in, and that a lot of people are struggling with. I think, because that's kind of the natural way. The winner can take it all. But there are certainly opportunities for everybody if we just get rid of, on the one hand, this totally inflated excitement about what it is that we're dealing with. It's not magic. It's just a machine. It's just a tool. And on the other hand, the fear A lot of people are afraid, so you don't even get to sort of grasping the opportunities that they're out there for everybody. So even the EU institutions, the European Commission, should obviously now create its own large language model with all this data that is hopefully not being crawled yet and scraped by the big tech companies. So you create your own little power here. But that's the same for individuals. You know, every translator. Maybe I'm taking too long answering this question. Tell me. But you know, we created with funding from the European Commission, by the way, a data marketplace where every individual translator can upload their translation memories and earn money with it. Because people who develop MT systems or now large language models or small language models could use that data and pay for it. But people are not ready for it. They don't use it. We only have a small number of contributors of new data in this data marketplace. So, yeah, I think that's maybe in line with what Ashkan said, people don't change. I don't think so. I think people do change. We do adapt all the time, but maybe not in our DNA. So fear and exaggerated excitement prevail, and we're not down to earth and realistic about it.
Thank you. And agree, following on from Jaap's point about the benefits of AI translation and its kind of widespread deployment now, and the power in the hands of big tech, what questions should we ask ourselves about the ethics of AI right now?
Well, I mean, really building on what Jaap just said, then I think one of the most important things that we can do kind of in general is that we have to think of AI as these components of what could be called like socio-technical infrastructures of power. And basically to say what that is, I mean, if we think of our normal kind of physical reality, we have these roads and streets and bridges and doors and walls that kind of limits us or brings us opportunities. So if we think of this in this kind of virtual space where we have AI as increasingly part of these infrastructures of our lives, then this is the same way. It's a way of empowering and giving opportunities to some and disempowering others. So the problem is that often I would say also building on this idea about big tech, then often you will see that we have increasingly some infrastructures that are empowering the ones that are already empowered, and often reinforcing the kind of disempowerment of the ones that are less disempowered. I think so basically, I think the key ethical implications, the reason why I think that we can think of this in terms of power, and maybe we can think of it also basically mostly focused on the data when it comes to AI, is that we can even look at power, how it's distributed, and how power dynamics are reinforced in the data of AI. So we can think about how it's distributed, how it's accessed, how data is processed in AI design. And I think in the context of translation, for example, I think, and that's again building on this, who are we dependent on when we use these translation tools, then we should really pay particular attention to how and by who these models we're talking about are trained, and what kind of power dynamics they enforce. So when we're using these tools, this is a thing we have to think about. There's things like, there's other things, I think, we, of course, in the high-level group, we had a set of 7 ethical requirements to consider. But in specific, I want to be specific to the AI translation models. There's things like bias and cultural sensitivity. We can discuss that further. But, of course, this is something that we can see being reinforced in some training data. And where translations, for example, are reinforcing stereotypes or are culturally insensitive. I saw, for example, recently that there was some researchers that conducted tests on 14 large language models, and they found, for example, that OpenAI's ChatGPT and GPT-4 were most left-wing libertarian, while Meta's model was the most right-wing authoritarian. So if we think of AI translation systems as something that prioritizes specific worldviews, and they can also not just be specific worldviews, but also specific cultures like languages and dialects over others, then we immediately have this reinforcement of some specific power dynamics. So that's, of course, really important. I can think of other things, but we can consider that in the further conversation. But there's things like privacy and data security. In the beginning of ChatGPT, when that came out, for example, that can also be used for translation, there was big concerns. It was even closed in Italy for a while because there were concerns regarding how the data was used. We have other things. Job displacement was discussed before, and I think one thing that is really important is also this idea about what kind of human nuances do we lose? What kind of cultural sensitivity can we think of these language models as being able to reproduce? Basically, I think that is a problem, and I think that also the keynote speakers was talking about it before in terms of, can AI really do semantics? No, so yeah. So those are the key issues I would consider and think about.
Thank you, Gry. Jaap, did you want to expand on that perhaps? And you have a very good insight into the data that sits behind large language models and machine learning models in general. What translators need to know about
I think
data?
as much as possible. I mean, sometimes it's very obscure. You don't know where it's coming from when you tap into. And it's also, almost unnoticeable. I mean, through your CAT tool, your translation workstation, you may log into an MT engine, and the MT engine may use an LLM in the background. You don't even know where it's all coming from. But I think you have to be very aware of that. I mean, it's indeed kind of shocking that these large language models put their hands on every piece of content and data that they can put their hands on, and that everything is being used. So yeah, I think it's a real challenge, and that's why I hope there will be increasing interest in from the people in the industry in building their own private kind of data spaces where they can give certain priority or preference to using that data over in the back end, whatever comes from the large language models, from the big pool, because they can control the data that's going in there. And that so that goes for companies, but I think even also for LSPs or for individual translators. Important for everybody to be aware of copyright. What is copyrightable, what is not. I think everybody should be aware of that. Under the current legislation that may change, everybody's violating the legislation, and nobody knows how to penalize people who do that, or the companies that do that. But still, it is our current legal system. So I looked a little bit into that, and we published a little white paper on that. And so. And the way the models work is most of the time it's random segments that are being used. So you don't have a whole document that is training a model, but it's just the sequence of and the randomized segments. Not in every scenario, but very often. So is an individual segment copyrightable? If it's less than 11 words, most cases it's not. But you can. Unless it's very unique. I mean, would a song, a line from a song like "Yesterday, all my troubles seemed so far away," can you copyright that sentence? Probably not, because it's common language, even though everybody immediately thinks of Lennon and McCartney, of course. But another sentence is probably more unique, even though it's also not even just 11 words. Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. Who would come up with a sentence like that? Don McLean. You cannot steal that, right? So be aware of these sensitivities if you're in the profession. That helps you already to become more knowledgeable, more confident in working in this new environment. Yeah.
And I think as AI is widely adopted, not just obviously translation, but adopted across every industry and across every aspect of business, every business is going to be grappling with these questions and making decisions in respect to the type of data being used, copyright, data privacy, security, and so on. Gry, I saw a suggestion, I think it was in Harvard Business Review, that every business should have an AI ethics department. What do you think about that suggestion?
Well, I do. Of course, I think the reason why this is suggested is that there's clearly something missing in some of these comments. There's been for way too long we've had too much of a technical focus, too much on a business focus, looking at these kind of AI models as just another tool, another product, while in reality it has meanwhile been developing into something that has huge ethical implications. So of course this is a realization of that. What I would prefer though is that I think there's all kinds of things that are important to govern AI in society. There's the laws and there's ethical bodies like these, but what I would love to see is a kind of culture of innovation that is responsible on its own. So we have practices where we actually, when we develop these models, the developers are asking these questions themselves. How do I build data? What are the interests in the data embedded in this model, and so on and so forth? And that we don't have these kind of external factors like this compliance mentality where we're thinking we need to comply, we need this checklist, we have a law we have to apply to, now we have an ethics department that comes in with a red light. Rather to have this idea to say that I want to do a kind of innovation that is beneficial, that supports humanity in a certain way, respects all our nuances, that is supporting. Now we're talking about emotion and rationality, but it's supporting rather replacing the emotional aspects of humanity, which is something that can be done, but you just cannot. It can't be replaced. It can do other things, but it can't replace. No, so that's my immediate thoughts on it.
Thank you. Very interesting perspective. I wanted to turn now more specifically to the role of translators, and this has been explored in depth in this conference so far. There seems to be a broad thesis developing across the industry that AI will generate more demand for highly skilled niche specialist translators while reducing demand for generalists. Jaap, how do you see the role of translators changing?
Yeah, in a big way. I think everybody's noticing that already. Of course, adoption of machine translation for a big part of the pie, so to say, of the volume of content. But post-editing that many people are asked to do now, maybe in the industry, in my view, is definitely not the end game. If you compare it, for instance, to how other industries went through an evolution of automation, you can think of factory automation. The assembly line was maybe our post-editing process. There's still people standing along this assembly line fixing problems and repairing something that went wrong maybe in the automated manufacturing process. And now they're replaced by robots, and we're even moving towards 3D printing and distributed manufacturing. So our industry will just evolve and go through all these stages. And it's not different from other industries, take, for instance, the travel industry. You had these travel booking offices, and they all disappeared, and we now buy everything online through an app. And that's basically what happens to translation. Translation for most of the billions of people on this planet is an app, right? It's not a service that you buy. It's an API. It's embedded in every other sort of platform. It's an add-on somewhere in the corner on a website, translate. So that's how the industry probably dissolves, disappears, if you like, gets distributed. Not getting smaller. Oh no, it's getting way bigger. Look at the banking industry. There used to be buildings where people would make sure that the money got transferred from one account to another, and lots of hands and brains were involved in that, making a simple money transfer. And now we have a fintech industry that's probably 100 times bigger than the banking industry many years ago. Lots of new jobs that have been created by smart people. That is what will happen to the legal service industry. Way bigger than the translation industry. I read somewhere 200 billion. So they're behind us. It's horrible if you look how a lawyer's office is working today with all the technology that's available to them. But it will change, and inevitably. It's just the way things go. It's unstoppable. But I think, in many respects, it's good news because we get more interesting jobs. At least, again, from my personal perspective, because translating a manual is not, for how you use a device, is not intellectually very rewarding for me, at least not. But now you already see that people find jobs in many more different companies. As in a cultural advisory role, or if they're more technical, indeed, and now it's the buzzword is prompt design or prompt engineering. There are many of new jobs, and we can create these new jobs if we take control, if we take ownership of this change. And every company, small, medium, large, every institution, every platform is going to be multilingual, if not already, is global, because people are migrating. Amsterdam, I heard, has the highest number of nationalities, passports. So it's not like you have to travel. Even when you stay home, you have to speak many different languages. And we, as an industry, can help the world moving towards that future, with lots of new jobs.
Thank you. And we have another Slido for the audience, if we can bring this up on screen. So we want you to do a linguistic task. Fill this lexical gap. Please invent a term for the human capability to discern and articulate the value of AI output. So we're asking this question because it turns our attention back to the human element. Without humans to expertly evaluate AI output, we have no visibility on its value. We depend on medical professionals to detect and tell us if AI is accurately diagnosing tumours. And we depend on translators to expertly discern the value of machine translation. So what word would you use for this? And I think we'll let this evolve a bit and come to the results at the end. Assessor. And also, please feel free to use words from other languages or combine them as you like. So we'll leave that question going, but I wanted to turn back to Gry and get your thoughts on what do we lose if we automate the process of translation. Should we be automating it wherever possible, wherever it's productive to do so? What's the value of this cognitive process compared to the algorithmic process of machine translation?
Well, we should absolutely not automate all translation, but I do agree that there is areas where it can be very beneficial, and there's areas where it can support translators in many ways. But of course, I think there's something, and that also, goes back to my identity as an original linguist, to understand language as an expression of humanity, And there's things that a machine speaks a specific language, and I think I heard the end of the last keynote very well, and it does speak, the language of rationality. So of course it does dissect language into mathematics mathematical formulas, and there's certain things like semantics and meanings and cultural context and things that a machine would never be able to replicate. I used to like to use the example of one of my Danish, she's not mine, but I feel very connected to her, Karen Blixen, who basically became famous because she was translating she became internationally known and famous for her very particular style because she was translating all her things from Danish into English, and she was actually very well known for her Danglish, as it was called, and she used to also bring in words from her African experience and everything, and that became that kind of mesh of her multiple cultural identities became her style. And I think that is, the kind of thing that a machine would never be able to replace. So there are, of course, areas where you can you can ask ChatGPT to write a poem that can be quite beautiful. But what you cannot, ask it is to actually reproduce the authenticity of the moment, of the experience, of the lived experience of a human. And I think that's basically, in that way, we are not really threatened. And that's, sometimes we are forced and asked to kind of compare the two different things or compare, a machine translation with a human translation, and considering as almost the same, and the two are competing. I think what we should think of is to think of it as two things that can exist at the same time. And we just have to be careful of not thinking exactly this thing that just because we can translate a text easily and it gives us the access to speak to another person that we otherwise wouldn't be able to speak to, just because there's an opportunity in this, that doesn't mean that you can automatically translate a beautiful poem written by a person in a specific language with a specific identity and history and context. So I think that it's just, it's a way of, understanding what is good for what and what can it not be used for, no?
Yeah. If I may, I know we're running out of time, but I totally agree. Live with this idea that it's two different things, two different cultures, a humanist and a scientific, maybe culture, if you like. This may sound very as a paradox, but I personally refuse to use ChatGPT. I think it's terrible. I'm not on social media, not at all. I don't like it. And yet you hear me talking about the future, how fantastic it will be. Because I see it as a tool, as a utility, and nothing more than that. I think it's awful if we totally lose our autonomy. I think it's terrible if people are lost with Google Maps. You have to get lost to find your way. I mean, that's humans, right? Then you become creative. And if we lose that autonomy and we can't do calculations by head, if we can't do translations anymore, I think everybody should be studying language, absolutely. And try to write poetry, absolutely. We have to survive as human beings, but use those tools because they're so handy. Yeah.
Well, we'll go to audience questions in a moment, but on that note, I just wanted to thank our two wonderful panelists. And perhaps we can revisit the results of Slido 2. I think there was some interesting consensus emerging: human intelligence, AI evaluation, AI assessor, genuine intelligence. So those are the front runners, and perhaps we can have a look at some of the questions from our remote audience, and then we can take maybe a question from our audience here. So we've got a few questions here with a lot of upticks. The first one: all translators can upload translation memories and earn money from doing so. What about confidentiality and NDAs? Jaap, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, you need to check that first. Is it your data or your customer's data? If you're a translator, you need to check that. But if it's yours, then you can do that. Yeah.
And I think we have time for one question from... Do we have any questions from people in the audience here? No? In that case, we can go back to... Oh, there is someone? Go ahead.
Hi. We seem to be on the foothills of this technology revolution. It's going to take huge computing power. I wonder what the environmental impact is going to be and what the panel's solution is to all this. Because all these computers crunching the data, I can't imagine what heat and energy it's going to take up. Any solution? Shall we go to clockwork, perhaps?
Gree, maybe you wanted to take this one?
Yeah, well, that's actually one of the key, also actually one of the ethical requirements I did not mention, but it was part of our thinking of the ethical high level group on AI, and to kind of assure you, this is one of the key conversations at the moment regarding this, and one of the key arguments for maybe not consider that everything that, arguing against this technological solutionism where we're thinking that everything can be automated, because it's a very good argument against to really think about that every single model that we create and that we train has an environmental footprint. So the solution I cannot give here because it's a very complex solution. It demands a lot of measurement and understanding of, what is the digital footprint or the AI footprint. It also demands a lot of tools in regards to there's different ways of building and training models, for example. But I can assure you that it's something that is really being considered. It's something also that I'm working on in relation to the data pollution and power concept in general. So, but unfortunately, I don't have a solution like this.
Thank you, Gree. And on that note, we'll wrap up. So thank you to you, our audience, for your input and ideas. And thank you again to our great panelists, Jav and Gree.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. A small reminder, if you have registered for an online session still today or tomorrow,